What if a single man's quiet decision changed the course of world history without most Americans ever learning his name? On the morning of September 26, 1983, the world stood closer to nuclear annihilation than at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis. While Americans slept and televisions played late-night reruns, a Soviet military officer sat inside a dimly lit command center, staring at a screen that told him the United States had just launched a nuclear attack. His name was Stanislav Petrov, and the fate of the world rested on his judgment. Petrov was on duty at the Serpukhov 15 bunker, a top-secret Soviet early warning facility outside Moscow. The Cold War was at one of its tensest moments. Just 3 weeks earlier, Soviet forces had shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007 after it strayed into Soviet airspace, killing 269 civilians, including a U.S. congressman. Relations between Washington and Moscow were poisonous. Both sides were primed for the worst. Shortly after midnight, alarms suddenly screamed through the bunker. A red message flashed across the monitor: launch. According to the Soviet satellite system, an American intercontinental ballistic missile had been fired toward the USSR. Protocol was clear. Petrov was required to immediately report the attack up the chain of command, which would almost certainly trigger a retaliatory nuclear strike. Then another alarm sounded, and another. The system now reported 5 incoming U.S. nuclear missiles. 5 missiles meant millions of lives. Petrov felt sweat gather on his palms. The computers were adamant. The data said the attack was real. The pressure on him was overwhelming. If he hesitated and the attack was genuine, the Soviet Union could be destroyed. If he reported it and the system was wrong, he could start World War III. Yet something felt off.
Petrov knew American nuclear strategy well. A real first strike would not involve just 5 missiles. It would involve hundreds, aimed at obliterating Soviet command centers before retaliation was possible. 5 missiles made no strategic sense. He also knew the satellite system was new and largely untested. Against every rule he had been trained to follow, Petrov made a decision that would later be described as an act of sheer human intuition. He reported the alert as a false alarm. For nearly 20 agonizing minutes, Petrov waited, expecting nuclear explosions or confirmation from radar stations. None came. Eventually, ground-based radar systems confirmed that no missiles were incoming. The satellite system had been fooled by a rare alignment of sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds, which the computers misinterpreted as missile launches. The world had come terrifyingly close to nuclear war, and almost no one knew. Petrov was not rewarded. In fact, he was reprimanded. Soviet officials were embarrassed that a human officer had overruled their advanced technology, exposing flaws in their system. Petrov was quietly sidelined, and his role remained classified for years. He left the military and lived a modest life, struggling financially and emotionally, carrying the weight of what might have happened had he chosen differently. Meanwhile, Americans went on with their lives, unaware that a man in a Soviet bunker had quite possibly saved New York, Washington, Los Angeles, and countless other cities from annihilation. It wasn't until the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, that Petrov's story became public. Western historians and journalists were stunned. U.S. defense experts openly acknowledged that Petrov's decision may have prevented a nuclear exchange that could have killed tens of millions in the first hours alone and potentially ended modern civilization. In 2004, Petrov finally received international recognition when he was awarded the World Citizen Award at the United Nations. He accepted it humbly, insisting he was not a hero, only someone who did his job. Yet his job description never included defying a superpower's nuclear protocol based on gut instinct and moral courage. Stanislav Petrov died in 2017, largely unknown to the broader public. There were no national days of mourning, no monuments in major capitals. And yet, historians increasingly agree on one thing. If Petrov had followed orders instead of his conscience, the world Americans know today might not exist. Sometimes, history is not changed by presidents, generals, or armies, but by a single human being who dares to question a machine in a moment when silence is safer than obedience.